guys, thanks very much for tuning into our video. I'm Michael Patrick.
And I'm Oisín Kearney. We are a writing partnership. We've written for stage, for TV and radio. We're currently working with the Traverse Theatre as the IASH Playwriting Fellows of 2022.
And we're absolutely thrilled that they've asked us to deliver the next in their series of playwriting workshops after Megan Tyler's Anyone Can Write a Play and Laurie Motherwell's How to Build Your Voice.
Now, if you've not watched those, we'd really recommend it. They've got loads of rules and tools, and they're really helpful for any writer, whether you're a beginner or very experienced.
So if you'd like to go and give them a watch, if you've not done that already, pause this video and come back when you've done so. We'll wait.
Thanks for coming back. Over the next 4 15-minute videos, we're going to offer you a crash course in structure, talking about the building blocks of story, which will be really helpful for writing plays.
But similar rules also work if you're writing for television, screen, creative non-fiction, or just telling a story to your mates.
We'll talk about acts, scenes, the time and place, and the hero's journey.
Now, it's not a hard and fast rulebook. What we're going to talk about is a framework that can help you sculpt your scripts and tweak your stories. It's basically something to hang your hat on if you ever get stuck.
Now, it's good to know the theory of conventional classical story structure so that you can decide to do whatever you want with your own story.
So what we're going to present in these videos, it's nothing that we've come up with ourselves. It's all things that we've picked up from working on the job. We've learned them from videos like this, from writing workshops, from reading lots and lots of books, and from some very lovely feedback from incredibly patient people after we have delivered very bad first drafts and second drafts.
And third drafts, sometimes fourth drafts.
And often fifth drafts.
But, this video series is our attempt to pass on some of that knowledge to you, and hopefully that's valuable. Everything we're going to talk about in these videos, we use all the time in everything we write. Hopefully we can help you find something that's useful for you.
So, what is structure?
So Ira Glass of the great podcast This American Life, he talks about narrative as basically a sequence of events. Something happens, then something else, then something else, then something else maybe, and then human instinct compels us to stick around to see what happens.
So if narrative is a sequence of events, then structure is where those events are placed. How many scenes, how many events, and when and where do they appear in the story?
Shall we go over to the flip chart?
Yes, let's. Thanks for joining us at the flip chart. So, when we're talking about structure, we like to boil it down to essentials. We think about it as 1, 2, 3. Beginning, middle, end.
Now, that might sound a bit simple, but it's really the basis of all story.
There are many different ways different practitioners refer to this, but it's all really different ways of saying 1, 2, 3. Use whatever you find helpful.
So, 1, 2, 3. Introduction. Development. Conclusion.
Or you might hear it referred to as setup, confrontation, resolution.
Or for you philosophers out there, thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Ordinary world, extraordinary world, ordinary world again, but changed.
Water, fire, steam.
Blue, yellow, green.
Or what we're going to refer to as Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3.
So, what is an act? An act is a unit of action consisting of a number of scenes. The acts themselves have a beginning, middle, and an end. And at the end of the act, it spins the narrative off into a new direction, into a new act.
So we're going to be looking at stories in a 3-act structure. This isn't the same as what you might read in a play script.
Yeah, because a lot of plays now you might say, oh, it's a 1-act play, or maybe it's got an interval, so it's a 2-act play.
Or maybe it's a 4-act play like a Chekhov, or 5 acts like Shakespeare.
But no matter how many acts the play claims they all have a 3-act structure.
All the others are just variations of the same thing. Yeah. So Act 1, introduction. So what happens in that? We introduce the protagonist.
Act 2, what happens in Act 2? We confront the protagonist with their opposite or with the antagonist.
And in the third act, we synthesize to achieve balance.
Okay, it's a wee bit heady there, but let's see if we can make the structure work. Oisín, can you think of a basic story, a fairy tale, say?
Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
All right, Goldilocks and Three Bears. Hopefully you know that. If you don't, check it out on the internet. How would you break Goldilocks and the Three Bears into a 3-act structure?
Okay, so Act 1, once upon a time, there are 3 bears, Daddy Bear, Mama Bear, and Small Bear. They make porridge and they go off into the forest.
All right, and then how does that develop in Act 2?
Okay, so Act 2, the antagonist, a little girl, goes inside the house, tastes the porridge, and sleeps in their beds.
And then your conclusion in Act 3?
Okay, so the conclusion is the bears come home, they see somebody has been there, and they scare Goldilocks away, and she runs back into the forest, and there you go.
That's your ending. Introduction, development, conclusion. Now we're going to do an exercise for you guys. Do the same thing. Think of a fairy tale, the simplest story there is. Normally they're very clear structurally. And see if you can think of what's the introduction, what's the development, and what's the conclusion. We'll wait.
How did you get on?
So I did try the story of the 3 little pigs.
Okay, great.
All right, so
so tell us, what's the first act of the 3
Act
little
1,
pigs?
3 little pigs. 3 little pigs are sent out into the world to make their fortune, and they build 3 houses. One of straw, one of sticks, and one of brick.
Okay, what's Act 2?
The development, a big bad wolf comes upon the 3 houses. He blows down the straw house, he blows down the house made of sticks, but he can't blow down the house made of bricks.
So what happens in the third and final act?
In the conclusion, he tries to climb down the chimney of the house made of bricks, and he falls into a pot of boiling water, and the pigs eat him.
That's very cheery.
Yes.
It's interesting how both those and a lot of fairy tales have a number 3 in them, like 3 animals. You know, there's also 3 blind mice.
Yeah, so a lot of stories have 3 main characters. You got Hansel and Gretel and the Witch, Little Red Riding Hood with Little Red Riding Hood, the Granny and the Wolf.
3 amigos.
Yeah, 3 Musketeers.
Yeah, and that's because of 1, 2, 3.
We legitimately use this in everything we write. We think of, if we're writing a scene or anything, we're like, what's the introduction, what's the development, and what's the conclusion? It's simple, but we use it all the time. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk very briefly about a thing called the hero's journey, which breaks down the 3-act structure into something more detailed. So the hero's journey is a blueprint for any story about a person who wants something and tries to get it. Or a hero that goes on a quest, is victorious in crisis, and comes home changed. Which, to be honest, is most, if not all, stories out there.
This will just be a quick overview, so don't worry if you feel like we're going too fast. Again, this is just a framework, and we're going to break it down in greater detail in later videos.
But maybe you're not writing a plot-based play.
Yeah, maybe you want to focus on character or monologue.
Maybe it's absurdist play, something like Beckett.
Or UNESCO, and that's great. This is just a framework, but you might find it can assist you with developing a character's internal emotional journey or helping to structure language by setting up and paying off ideas and sentiments.
It's just a set of tools that you can use to frame your story, which will hopefully prove useful. So when we're going to go through the hero's journey here, we're going to use Back to the Future as our reference example as we go through it.
Now, if you haven't seen Back to the Future...
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, but pause this video and go and watch that, because it's brilliant.
As we go through our other videos, as we said, we're going to go into more detail in the hero's journey, and we will use other things, but for now, we're just going to look at Back to the Future.
Just the first film, though. We're not going to go on the second and third ones.
No, just
okay.
Back to the Future 1.
Good, alright. So, the hero's journey. Let's give us ourselves a wee sort of timeline here.
It's very apt for Back to the Future timelines.
Uh-huh.
So, Act 1, the first part of the hero's journey is a thing called the ordinary world. This is how your protagonist normally lives their life before the story starts. So you got your who, what, when, where. Some exposition about the character and the world they live in.
So
Back to the Future?
Back to the Future, Marty's a kid in 1985. He likes to play guitar and he's got hopes, fears and flaws.
And then we move on to the next part, the inciting incident. This is something that happens that sets our character on a different path. It's sometimes called the call to action. It's the thing that kicks off the events of the story. So, in Back to the Future...
So in Back to the Future, Doc literally gives Marty a call to adventure. He calls him on the phone. He says, get down here. And then Marty sees the DeLorean and he witnesses time travel.
He witnesses time travel is possible for the first time. Next we have a thing called the refusal of the quest. Now this is a thing where your protagonist is confronted with a new story, but maybe doesn't quite want to get on board, doesn't want to go on the path that they've been set.
So in Back to the Future, it's Marty has just seen time travel as possible, and he has no need or want to go traveling in time. He's like, I don't want to get in the DeLorean.
And then finally, your Act 1 climax, the end of Act 1, sometimes called the choosal. This is where your protagonist goes on their adventure.
And in Back to the Future, that is when the Libyans come, they kill Doc Brown, and Marty has to get in the time machine to get away from them, but he goes 88 miles an hour and travels through time.
So, there is your Act 1. That should be about a quarter or a third of the way through the story. Oisín, you've drawn too big.
I know, but
we're going to run out of
it's
space.
hard to do the whole timeline in one line. So,
alright, we'll do a new line.
Yeah, so I'm going to do to the midpoint here. This will be the first half of the story. It was all intended, all intentional. And then this will be the second half of the story.
Alright,
does that work?
Yeah, it'll have to. Okay, so, Act 2. Moving from Act 1 into Act 2. The start of Act 2 is what's known as fun and games. Things are going well for your character on their quest. They're making new allies, they're maybe encountering enemies, but generally they're just having the crack and they're having good time.
So in Back to the Future, fun and games is Marty has entered 1955. He doesn't know what's going on. He has to go find Doc Brown in 1955 and he meets his parents and he has a grand old time.
Yeah, it's the good crack part of the story. Which brings us now to the midpoint, which is now here.
So that's going to be here, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. This is the point of no return. This is where our character does something, or something happens to them, or they learn something that means they can no longer just turn back. They have changed, or their quest has changed.
So in Back to the Future, that's when Marty realizes that his presence in the past has made his parents not come together, which means that his very existence is threatened, and he sees it in the photograph with his brother who's just starting to disappear.
Do you want to draw your new line?
Yes, sorry. So we're still in Act 2, or Act 2B maybe, and then this is the rest of the story.
So the second half of your story, the second half of Act 2, kicks off with things get serious. So this is kind of the inverse of fun and games. It's when the fallout from the midpoint starts to affect our protagonist. Things are getting worse for them. Their quest is not going well. Just progressive complications. Things are getting worse.
And in Back to the Future, that's when Marty's trying to get his parents back together, but things keep going wrong. He just can't seem to do it.
And that brings us to the end of Act 2, which is the worst point and the dark night of the soul. This is the worst point for your character, as it does what it says in the tin. It's the worst point. So whatever is going on, whatever the quest is, this should feel like it's a failure. They're not going to make it.
And in Back to the Future, it's when Marty's playing guitar for his parents to bring them together, but they're not kissing, and then he starts to disappear, and he looks up and his hand is disappearing, and he's not going to exist anymore. It's pretty bad.
So, what is the worst consequence of Marty going back in time to 1955, which was the inciting incident? The worst possible consequence of that is that he ceases to exist.
And he has quite a short dark night of the soul where he looks over and he thinks, oh, I'm not going to exist anymore, and he's kind of falling away, and we think he's done for, basically.
Yeah. Again, we'll go into more detail of this in our later videos. Just a brief overview. So, that is our Act 2. If we remember back to the start of the video, we had 1, 2, 3. Introduction, development, conclusion. We had Act 1, which is our introduction. We introduced Marty and we set him on his quest. We've now had our development, which was he's gone on his quest and it's gone pretty bad. So now we're looking forward to Act 3, the conclusion.
Act 3.
So, Act 3 starts with the climax. The protagonist meets their biggest test. Just when all had seemed lost, they manage to come through and succeed, and they make a thrilling escape from death, literal or metaphorical.
So the climax of Back to the Future is Marty. There's actually quite a few climaxes, aren't there? Marty saves his parents. He plays Johnny Be Good. He then races to Doc Brown to travel back in time. They just about do it in the nick of time. He goes back. He thinks he's going to try and save Doc Brown from the Libyans, and then Doc Brown is alive because he's wearing a vest because Marty had sent him a letter through time.
Yeah, he manages to solve his dilemma, his quest. He achieves his quest. He gets his parents together, and he gets back to 1985. And finally, the last part of your story, the denouement. And they all lived happily ever after. This is where your protagonist returns to their ordinary world, having changed because of the events of the story.
So in Back to the Future, Marty travels back to 1985, but everything's changed and his family are happier and richer, and Biff, the antagonist, is now defeated and he's their servant.
Which is very strange.
Yeah.
Now that's a good example of the world having literally changed, but often the world stays the same, but your protagonist has changed. Think of the hobbits in Lord of the Rings. They return to the Shire is the same, but they are different.
So this was our quick crash course on the hero's journey. We hope it made sense. Sorry about the squiggling. As I said before, we're going to go into it in greater detail in the next videos. So before we do that, we're going to leave you with an exercise.
So, your second exercise of the video, we want you to think of a film or a play or a story or an episode of a TV show and try and map the hero's journey onto it. Very clear, simple ones are things like superhero origin stories or plucky underdog sports films tend to follow this very closely. So maybe pick one of those. Why don't you pause the video now and give that a go.
And if you haven't paused, there you have it. Our first video on building blocks, how to structure your story.
Really hope you found something useful in this, and please do tune in to video 2, which we will look at Act 1 in greater detail, the beginning.
How do you open your story? What are the elements you must include to kick your play or your story off to the best start?
Yeah. See you then. Cheers.
Thank you.